London, October 1858. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, carried by a boy too well dressed to be a common messenger. Miss Eugenia Hartley accepted it with hands still damp from washing the children's breakfast dishes, her employer, Mrs. Whitmore, hovering in the doorway with undisguised curiosity. The seal was unfamiliar, deep burgundy wax pressed with initials she did not recognize. Eugenia broke it carefully, aware of Mrs. Whitmore's watchful eyes, and unfolded the heavy cream paper. Miss Hartley, your presence is requested at the offices of Pemberton & Sons, Lincoln's Inn Fields, tomorrow at 2 o'clock precisely. The matter concerns a proposal of significant advantage to your situation. Discretion is appreciated. Respectfully, J. Pemberton. Solicitor Eugenia read it twice, her heart performing an uncomfortable dance against her ribs. A proposal of significant advantage. The words felt both promising and ominous, like a door opening onto a room she could not yet see into. "Well?" Mrs. Whitmore demanded, patience exhausted. "What is it?" "A solicitor wishes to see me," Eugenia replied, folding the letter with deliberate care. "Tomorrow afternoon." "A solicitor!" Mrs. Whitmore's eyebrows climbed toward her greying hairline. "Whatever for? You haven't come into money, have you?" Eugenia nearly laughed at the absurdity. At 28 years old, orphaned since 16, she possessed neither family nor fortune nor prospects of acquiring either. The only inheritance her father, a village vicar, had left her was an education far superior to her station and a collection of books she'd been forced to sell, one by one, over the years. "I cannot imagine why he wishes to see me," she said truthfully. "But I shall go and discover it." Mrs. Whitmore's expression soured. "I trust this won't interfere with your duties. The children—" "I shall return by evening," Eugenia interrupted gently. She had learned, over 6 years of employment, that firmness disguised as politeness was the only defense a governess possessed. "Tomorrow is Friday. We can do their French lessons in the morning." Mrs. Whitmore sniffed, but said nothing more. Eugenia curtsied, always curtsy, always acknowledge the hierarchy, and retreated to the schoolroom where her 3 young charges waited. That night, alone in her small room beneath the eaves, Eugenia lay awake and wondered. The autumn wind rattled the window glass. Below, London hummed with life she was not part of. Theatres and ballrooms and dinners where people like her served but never sat. A proposal of significant advantage. She did not dare to hope. Hope, she had learned, was a luxury for women with dowries. The offices of Pemberton & Sons occupied a respectable building in Lincoln's Inn Fields, all dark wood and leather-bound books that spoke of old money and older families. Eugenia arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, wearing her best dress, a modest grey silk that had been new 4 years ago, and carefully maintained ever since. A clerk led her through hushed corridors to a private office where a man of perhaps 60 sat behind a massive desk. He rose when she entered, his movements stiff with formality. "Miss Hartley, thank you for coming. I am Joseph Pemberton." He gestured to a chair upholstered in burgundy velvet. "Please, sit." Eugenia sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. Every lesson her mother had taught her about deportment rose to the surface now. A governess was neither servant nor lady, occupying that precarious space between, invisible to some, beneath notice to others. "I confess, Mr. Pemberton, your letter has left me rather mystified," she said, keeping her voice steady. Pemberton settled behind his desk, steepling his fingers. "I shall be direct, Miss Hartley. I represent William Ashford, Marquess of Ashford. His lordship is in need of a wife." The words hung in the air like smoke. Eugenia stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon." "A wife," Pemberton repeated calmly, as if he discussed the weather. More specifically, a mother for his 3 children. Lady Catherine Ashford died 3 years ago in childbirth. The children, Lady Charlotte, Lord Thomas, and Lady Margaret, are 9, 6, and 4 years old respectively. They require a woman's care. Eugenia's mind raced. Mr. Pemberton, I am a governess. Surely his lordship could find a more suitable candidate among his own class. His lordship does not wish to remarry for love. Pemberton said bluntly. He wishes for a practical arrangement. Someone educated, respectable, and capable of managing a household and children. Someone who understands that this is a position, not a romance. A position. The word settled in Eugenia's chest like a stone. Of course, not a proposal of marriage, but of employment. Elevated employment, to be sure, but employment nonetheless. I see, she said quietly. And what would be expected of me, exactly? Pemberton pulled a document from a drawer, sliding it across the desk. You would become Lady Ashford in name and legal standing. You would live at Ashford Hall in Derbyshire, oversee the household, and care for the children. In return, you would receive financial security, social position, and the protection of his lordship's name. And his lordship? Eugenia asked, something tightening in her throat. What does he expect from me beyond the children's care? Pemberton's expression remained neutral. Discretion, competence, nothing more. Nothing more. No affection, then. No companionship. Certainly no love. Merely a transaction. Her labor for his name. Her invisibility for his convenience. Eugenia looked down at her hands, rough from work that ladies of quality never touched. At 28, she was firmly on the shelf, her youth gone, her chances of a true marriage vanished years ago. Mrs. Whitmore would dismiss her eventually, governesses aged out of usefulness like horses. And then what? A charity house? Position as a seamstress, fingers bleeding over needlework until her eyes failed. May I ask? She said carefully. Why his lordship chose me specifically? Your former employer, Mrs. Davison, recommended you highly before she passed. She mentioned your character, your education, and your circumstances. Pemberton's tone softened almost imperceptibly. His lordship requires someone who will not harbour illusions, Miss Hartley. Someone practical. Someone desperate enough to accept, he meant. Someone with no other options. Eugenia drew a slow breath. When would his lordship wish to meet me? Today, if you are amenable. He is waiting in the adjoining room. Her heart lurched. He's here. Now? His lordship does not waste time on matters of business. Pemberton said, rising. Shall I fetch him? Eugenia's hands trembled. She pressed them flat against her skirt, willing them still. This was madness, utter madness, and yet, yes, she heard herself say, please. William Ashford, Marquess of Ashford, was beautiful in the way a winter landscape is beautiful, cold, remote, and somehow inhospitable to life. He entered the room with the unconscious grace of a man born to command, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in black that made his dark hair and pale blue eyes more striking. He might have been carved from marble, so little expression did his face hold. Eugenia rose, curtsying automatically. He barely glanced at her. Miss Hartley? He said, his voice a low, cultured baritone utterly devoid of warmth. Pemberton has explained the arrangement? He has, my lord. And you find the terms acceptable? Acceptable, as if she were reviewing a contract for glove purchases. Eugenia lifted her chin slightly, meeting his eyes. Or trying to. He was looking past her, at the wall, at nothing. I have some questions, my lord, if I may. Briefly. He pulled out a pocket watch, checking it. A busy man, then, too busy to look at the woman he proposed to marry. The children, Eugenia said, ignoring the hurt that rose in her throat. What are their temperaments? What do they need most? For the first time, William's gaze actually focused on her, and she saw something flicker there, pain, quickly shuttered. They need a mother. They need stability. They need someone who will not abandon them. The bitterness in those last words was sharp enough to cut. Eugenia absorbed it, understanding blooming. His wife had not chosen to die, but perhaps he blamed her anyway. Or blamed himself. Grief did strange things to people. "I will not abandon them," she said softly. "You have my word. Then we are agreed." He turned to Pemberton. "Draw up the papers. We marry within the week." "My lord." Eugenia stepped forward, pulse hammering. "Should we not speak more? Discuss expectations, or there is nothing to discuss?" William's voice was flat, final. "You will care for my children. I will provide for you. That is the entirety of our arrangement." He finally looked at her directly, and his eyes were empty as winter sky. "Do not expect more, Miss Hartley. I have nothing more to give." He left before she could respond, the door closing behind him with a soft, terrible click. Eugenia stood frozen, Pemberton's sympathetic gaze burning into her back. Her hands were shaking again. She had just agreed to marry a ghost. "The ceremony will be simple," Pemberton said quietly. "His lordship prefers discretion." "Of course," Eugenia whispered. Discretion? She wondered if anyone would even notice when she became Lady Ashford. She suspected not. After all, she had spent 28 years being invisible. Why should marriage change that? The wedding took place on a grey Thursday morning in a small church near Ashford Hall, with only Pemberton and a vicar who looked uncomfortable throughout the brief ceremony. Eugenia wore her grey silk again, the closest thing she owned to a wedding dress. William stood beside her in black, as motionless as a statue, and spoke his vows in the same emotionless tone he might use to read a shopping list. When the vicar pronounced them married, William did not kiss her. He merely nodded once, signed the register, and walked out of the church. Pemberton pressed her hand gently. "Courage, Lady Ashford," he murmured. Lady Ashford. The title sat strangely in her mind, like an ill-fitting glove. The carriage ride to Ashford Hall was silent, except for the rhythmic clatter of wheels on road. William sat across from her, staring out the window at the passing Derbyshire countryside. Eugenia studied him when he wasn't looking. The hard line of his jaw, the shadows beneath his eyes, the white-knuckled grip he maintained on his walking stick. A man in pain, she thought. A man who had decided not to feel anything rather than feel too much. "The children," she ventured after half an hour of oppressive quiet. "Will they know about the marriage? Have they been told?" "They have been informed that a new lady will be joining the household," William said, still not looking at her. "They understand you will be managing their care." "Do they know I am to be their stepmother?" "Stepmother." He said the word as if tasting something bitter. "You are not replacing Catherine. No one could replace Catherine." The rebuke stung, though Eugenia had not intended any such presumption. "Of course not, my lord. I only wish to know what they expect of me." "Expect obedience and adequate education. Provide those, and there will be no difficulty." Obedience and adequate education. As if she were a particularly accomplished governess, not his wife. Eugenia turned to her own window, blinking back the moisture in her eyes. She would not cry. She had made this choice knowing exactly what it was, a transaction, nothing more. She had no right to feel wounded by his coldness when he had promised nothing else. The countryside grew wilder as they travelled, rolling hills giving way to woodland and moorland. Finally, as dusk began to gather, the carriage turned through iron gates and up a long tree-lined drive. Ashford Hall rose before them like something from a Gothic novel, grey stone, tall windows, ancient and imposing. Beautiful, Eugenia thought distantly, and profoundly lonely. The carriage stopped. William descended first, not offering his hand. Eugenia climbed down alone, her legs stiff from hours of sitting. The front door opened, and servants emerged in a neat line. Housekeeper, butler, footman, maids. Their faces were carefully neutral as they curtsied and bowed. "Mrs. Davies, this is Lady Ashford," William said to the housekeeper, a woman of perhaps 55, with iron-grey hair and sharp eyes. "She will require a tour of the house tomorrow. See that she is made comfortable." "Yes, my lord." Mrs. Davies curtsied, but her gaze on Eugenia was assessing, almost sceptical. "The children?" William asked. "In the nursery, my lord, preparing for bed." "Good." He turned to Eugenia at last, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Davies will show you to your rooms. I trust you will find them adequate." Your rooms. Plural. Not his rooms, then. Not shared. Of course not. "Thank you, my lord," Eugenia said, her voice steady despite everything. William inclined his head once, a dismissal, and disappeared into the house without another word. Mrs. Davies stepped forward, her expression professionally pleasant, but her eyes still cold. "If you will follow me, Lady Ashford." Eugenia followed, carrying her own small bag because no one offered to take it, through corridors lined with portraits of Ashford's past. They stared down at her with varying degrees of aristocratic disdain. She felt like an intruder in a museum. Mrs. Davies stopped before a door in the west wing. "These are your chambers, my lady. Lord Ashford's rooms are in the east wing." "As far apart as possible, then." "Thank you, Mrs. Davies." The housekeeper hesitated, something almost like pity crossing her face. "His lordship has had a difficult time since Lady Catherine passed. He is not himself." "I understand," Eugenia said softly. "Do you?" Mrs. Davies' tone was not unkind, but it was pointed. "Lady Catherine was exceptional, beautiful, accomplished, beloved. His lordship adored her." "And you are nothing like her," the unspoken words echoed. "Do not presume to fill her shoes." "I am not here to replace Lady Catherine," Eugenia said, lifting her chin. "I am here to care for the children, nothing more." Mrs. Davies studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good night, Lady Ashford." "Good night." Alone at last, Eugenia entered her new rooms. They were lovely, far lovelier than anywhere she had ever lived. A sitting room with a fireplace already lit, a bedchamber beyond with a four-poster bed draped in blue silk, windows overlooking gardens gone dark with autumn. She set down her bag and sank onto the bed, hands folded in her lap. She was Lady Ashford now. Marchioness, a title she had no right to, a position she had purchased with her loneliness. The house was silent around her, vast and cold. Somewhere in this maze of corridors, 3 children slept, children who needed her, even if their father did not want her. Eugenia closed her eyes, exhaustion finally crashing over her. She had made her choice. There was no going back now. She woke to darkness and the sound of crying. For a moment, disoriented in unfamiliar surroundings, Eugenia thought she'd dreamed it. Then it came again, a child's muffled sobbing, heartbreaking in its attempts at quietness. She rose quickly, pulling a shawl over her nightgown, and opened her door. The corridor was dark, save for a single sconce burning low. The crying came from somewhere to her left. Eugenia followed the sound, heart aching. She passed several closed doors before finding one slightly ajar, golden lamplight spilling through the gap. She pushed it open gently. A boy sat on a bed far too large for him, knees drawn up, face buried in his arms. Small, dark-haired, shaking with silent sobs. This must be Thomas, the middle child, 6 years old. "Sweetheart?" Eugenia said softly, stepping into the room. The boy's head snapped up, revealing a tear-stained face and wide, frightened eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered immediately. "I didn't mean to wake anyone. I'm sorry." "You didn't wake me." Eugenia lied gently, moving closer. "I couldn't sleep either. May I sit with you?" Thomas stared at her, confusion and longing warring on his small face. "You're the new lady. Papa said you'd be here." "I'm Eugenia," she said, sitting carefully on the edge of his bed. "And yes, I'm here now. What's wrong, darling? Did you have a nightmare?" His voice broke. "I dreamed Mama came back, but when I tried to hug her, she disappeared. And Papa doesn't what?" Eugenia prompted gently. "He doesn't hug me anymore," Thomas whispered, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. "He doesn't hug any of us. Not since Mama died. I want him to, but he just walks away." Eugenia's heart cracked clean through. Without thinking, she opened her arms. "Come here." Thomas hesitated only a moment before throwing himself into her embrace, small body shaking with the force of his grief. Eugenia held him tight, one hand stroking his hair, murmuring soft, meaningless comfort the way her own mother had once comforted her. "I've got you," she whispered. "You're safe. I've got you." "I miss her." Thomas sobbed into her shoulder. "I miss her so much." I know you do. And Papa's still here, but it's like he's gone too." Eugenia had no answer for that, so she simply held him, rocking gently, until his sobs quieted to hitching breaths and finally to stillness. When she pulled back to look at him, his eyes were heavy with exhaustion. "Will you stay?" he asked in a small voice. "Just until I fall asleep?" "Of course." Eugenia helped him lie down, tucking the blankets around him. She sat beside him, one hand resting on his small shoulder. "I'll stay as long as you need." Thomas's eyes drifted closed. "Eugenia?" he murmured. "Yes?" "I'm glad you're here." Her throat tightened. "So am I, sweetheart." She stayed until his breathing deepened into sleep, then a bit longer, reluctant to leave him alone in the dark. When she finally rose, moving towards the door, a shadow in the corridor made her freeze. William stood there, motionless, watching. How long had he been there? Had he heard Thomas's words? "Papa doesn't hug me anymore." The expression on his face was impossible to read in the dim light, but something in his posture spoke of anguish. "My lord," Eugenia whispered, not wanting to wake Thomas. William said nothing. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the width of the doorway between them. He in the cold corridor, she in the warm circle of lamplight. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing softly down the hall until they disappeared into silence. Eugenia stood frozen, her hand pressed to a racing heart. She had seen something in his face just before he turned, something raw and broken and desperately, carefully hidden. William Ashford was not empty, she realized. He was full to bursting, with grief, with guilt, with love he could no longer express. He was not a ghost. He was a man in a prison of his own making. And somehow, she was going to have to find a way to help him and his children break free, even if he never wanted her, even if she remained invisible forever. She owed them that much. Morning arrived cold and grey, mist clinging to the gardens visible from Eugenia's windows. She dressed carefully in a simple blue day dress, pinned her hair into a neat arrangement, and steeled herself for whatever this first full day at Ashford Hall would bring. A maid arrived to escort her to breakfast. The girl was young, perhaps 16, with nervous eyes. "Begging your pardon, my lady, but his lordship takes breakfast in his study," she said, not quite meeting Eugenia's gaze. "Mrs. Davies thought you might wish to breakfast with the children in the nursery instead." Of course, William wouldn't join her. Why had she even imagined he might? The nursery would be lovely, thank you. The maid led her through the maze of corridors to the third floor, where bright morning light streamed through tall windows, and the sound of children's voices drifted into the hall. The nursery was a large, sunny room, with bookshelves lining one wall and toys neatly organized on shelves. A table was set for breakfast, and 3 children sat around it, conversation dying the moment Eugenia appeared in the doorway. "Good morning," she said gently, taking in each small face. Charlotte, the eldest at 9, sat very straight, her dark hair in perfect plaits, her expression solemn and assessing. She had her father's pale blue eyes and something of his guardedness. Thomas, whom Eugenia had comforted in the night, looked at her with cautious hope. And Maggie, small, blonde, 4 years old, simply stared with the frank curiosity of early childhood. "Good morning," Charlotte said, her voice carefully polite. "You are Papa's new wife?" "I am," Eugenia confirmed, sitting in the empty chair. "My name is Eugenia. You may call me that if you wish, or we had a mama already," Maggie announced, swinging her legs beneath the table. "She's in heaven with the baby." A thick silence fell. Charlotte's expression tightened. Thomas stared at his plate. "I know," Eugenia said softly, "and I'm not here to replace her. Your mama will always be your mama. I'm just here to help, if you'll let me." "Papa doesn't want help," Charlotte said, her voice tight. "He doesn't want anything." The pain in those words was devastating. This child, only 9 years old, was trying so hard to be strong, to be the adult her father had stopped being. "Sometimes," Eugenia said carefully, "people need help most when they say they don't want it." Charlotte's eyes met hers, sharp, intelligent, desperate. "Can you make Papa smile again?" There it was, the same question that must echo in this house constantly, unspoken. Can you fix him? Can you bring him back? Eugenia wanted to lie, to promise she could, but she had learned long ago that false hope was crueler than truth. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I promise you I will try. And in the meantime, I'm here for you 3, whatever you need." Maggie tilted her head. "Will you read us stories? Mama used to read us stories every night." "I love stories," Eugenia said, smiling at the little girl. "I would be honored." "And will you teach us things?" Thomas asked quietly. The old governess left. She said Papa was too difficult. Eugenia's chest tightened. "I will teach you whatever you wish to learn." "Can you teach me to be brave?" Charlotte whispered. And suddenly she wasn't a composed 9-year-old, but a frightened child, wearing armor too heavy for her small shoulders. Eugenia reached across the table, covering Charlotte's hand with her own. "Darling, you're already the bravest person I've ever met." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. She gripped Eugenia's hand so hard it hurt. In that moment, sitting in a sunlit nursery with 3 motherless children, Eugenia made a silent vow. She might be only a wife on paper to William Ashford. She might never earn his affection or even his regard. But these children, these beautiful broken children, they would have her whole heart, even if their father wanted none of it. The first weeks at Ashford Hall passed in a careful dance of establishing routines and learning boundaries, both the children's and William's. Eugenia rose early each morning, breakfasted with Charlotte, Thomas, and Maggie in the nursery, then spent her days teaching them literature, mathematics, French, and history. The children were bright, hungry for attention and structure. Charlotte threw herself into lessons with fierce concentration, as if academic excellence might somehow fix what was broken. Thomas was quieter but equally diligent, occasionally seeking Eugenia's hand during particularly difficult moments. And Maggie, Sweet, irrepressible Maggie asked 1,000 questions and climbed into Eugenia's lap whenever sadness overtook her. William remained a ghost in his own house. Eugenia saw him at dinner occasionally, meals conducted in near silence, punctuated only by the clink of silverware. He asked perfunctory questions about the children's progress, nodded at her answers, and retreated to his study immediately after. He never joined them for breakfast, never appeared in the nursery, never asked how she was settling in or if she needed anything. It was as if their wedding had never happened, as if she were merely an elevated governess, not his wife. Mrs. Davies thawed slightly over the weeks, grudgingly admitting that the children seemed happier. The other servants remained formally polite, but distant, their loyalty clearly to the memory of Lady Catherine, a woman Eugenia would never measure up to and had never sought to replace. On a cold November afternoon, Eugenia took the children on a walk through the estate gardens. The trees were nearly bare now, winter approaching with inevitable certainty. Maggie ran ahead, chasing fallen leaves, while Thomas walked beside Eugenia, his small hand tucked into hers. Charlotte lagged behind, and when Eugenia glanced back, she found the girl standing perfectly still, staring up at the house. "Charlotte," Eugenia called gently. "Are you all right?" Charlotte didn't move. "Papa is watching us." Eugenia followed her gaze to a second-floor window, William's study. A figure stood there, barely visible behind the glass. Even from this distance, Eugenia could feel the weight of his observation. "Perhaps he simply enjoys seeing you play," Eugenia suggested, though her heart beat faster. "He never joins us," Charlotte said, her voice flat. "He just watches, like we're paintings he's trying to remember." The insight was devastating in its accuracy. Before Eugenia could respond, Charlotte turned and ran to catch up with Maggie, leaving Eugenia standing alone on the path. She looked up at the window again. William remained motionless, a dark silhouette against the light. "What are you thinking?" she wondered. "What keeps you locked away from the people who love you?" The figure moved, stepping back from the window until he disappeared entirely. Eugenia wrapped her arms around herself against the cold and continued walking. The children needed her attention. William's pain, however much it called to something in her, was not hers to heal. He had made that abundantly clear. That evening, after tucking the children into bed, Eugenia found herself drawn to the library. Mrs. Davies had mentioned it during the house tour, a magnificent room filled with books collected over generations of Ashfords. The library was everything Eugenia had hoped: 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves, a fireplace large enough to stand in, leather chairs worn soft with use, and the particular smell of old paper and binding glue that meant home to anyone who loved books. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles in the firelight. Shakespeare, Milton, Austen, Scott. First editions, many of them. A fortune in literature. "You may use the library whenever you wish." Eugenia spun around, hand flying to her chest. William stood in the doorway, still dressed for dinner, his expression unreadable. "My lord, I didn't hear you come in." "I did not mean to startle you." He moved into the room with that same unconscious grace, stopping near the fireplace. Catherine spent many evenings here. She loved to read. There it was again. Catherine, the ghost that haunted every room, every conversation. "It's a beautiful collection," Eugenia said carefully. "Take whatever books you wish to your rooms, or read here, if you prefer." William stared into the fire, not at her. "The children may use it as well, though I ask that they treat the volumes with care." "Of course. Thank you, my lord." Silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy. Eugenia searched for something to say, some bridge across the chasm of his grief and her irrelevance. "The children are doing well in their lessons," she ventured. Charlotte is particularly gifted with languages. Thomas has a remarkable memory, and Maggie, I'm sure you're managing adequately." William's tone was dismissive, though not cruel, simply absent, as if he was speaking to someone he didn't quite see. Adequately. Such a cold, clinical word. "They miss you," Eugenia said before she could stop herself. "They would love to spend time with you. Perhaps a walk in the garden, or I see them at dinner. Sitting at opposite ends of a table is not the same as being with them." The words came out sharper than she intended. William's head turned slightly, and for the first time since that awful moment in Thomas's room, he actually looked at her. Really looked at her. His eyes were ice and pain and something that might have been anger. "Do not presume to tell me how to manage my children, Lady Ashford. I'm not—" Eugenia took a breath, forcing herself to speak calmly. "Forgive me. I simply thought—" "You thought what? That you could arrive here and miraculously heal us?" His voice remained level, but there was an edge beneath it now, sharp as broken glass. "That your care for them would somehow compensate for what they've lost?" "No," Eugenia said quietly. "I know I cannot replace what they've lost, but I can offer what I have. And what I have observed is that they don't only grieve their mother. They grieve their father, who is still alive but has stopped living." The silence that followed was deafening. William's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. Recognition, perhaps. Or fury. Eugenia couldn't tell. "You overstep," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps, but someone must." Eugenia straightened her spine, meeting his gaze. "You hired me to care for your children, my lord. That is what I'm attempting to do." "Then do so, but do not attempt to manage me." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Eugenia sank into one of the leather chairs, her hands trembling. She had gone too far. Pushed too hard. He would dismiss her, send her away, and the children would lose another person who cared for them. But as the minutes passed and no summons came, she realized he wasn't going to dismiss her. Because she was right, and he knew it. William Ashford wasn't cruel. He was drowning, and he had long ago stopped reaching for help. Eugenia pulled a book from the nearest shelf, Poetry, Blake, and opened it to a random page. The words blurred before her tired eyes. She would not give up on those children. And despite her better judgment, despite knowing it was futile and would only cause her pain, she realized she wasn't going to give up on their father either, even if he never wanted to be saved. December arrived with snow, transforming Ashford Hall into something from a fairy tale. The children were ecstatic, begging to play outside despite the cold. Eugenia bundled them in coats and scarves and watched them build a lopsided snowman in the garden, their laughter rising like steam into the frozen air. Charlotte was more relaxed outdoors, her careful composure melting into something closer to actual childhood. She threw snowballs at Thomas with precision that suggested military strategy. Maggie made snow angels, her small form disappearing into the drifts. "Eugenia! Eugenia, look!" Maggie called, pointing at her creation with pride. "It's beautiful, darling." Eugenia called back, smiling despite the cold numbing her cheeks. "Papa used to play in the snow with us." Thomas said quietly beside her. Before. That word carried the weight of worlds. "Did he?" Eugenia asked gently. Thomas nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "He would help us build snow forts, and he'd let us win snowball fights, but pretend we were actually beating him." A small smile crossed his face. "Mama would watch from the window and laugh." Eugenia's chest ached. "That sounds wonderful." "Do you think he'll ever play with us again?" She wanted to promise he would, but she had learned not to make promises she couldn't keep. "I hope so, sweetheart," Movement at a window caught her eye, the same window where she'd seen William weeks ago. He stood there now, watching them. Even from this distance, his isolation was palpable. An idea formed in Eugenia's mind. Reckless, perhaps, but she was tired of tiptoeing around his grief. "Children," she called, "shall we build something special? Something for your papa?" 3 faces turned to her, curiosity and something like hope brightening their expressions. "What do you mean?" Charlotte asked. "A snow family," Eugenia said. "One for each of us, including him." The children glanced at each other, then at the window where William still stood. "He won't come down," Charlotte said, but there was a question in her voice. "Perhaps not," Eugenia agreed. "But we can still include him, show him he's part of this family even when he feels apart from it." For a long moment no one moved. Then Maggie clapped her mittened hands together. "Yes, Papa needs a snow version." Thomas joined in immediately. And even Charlotte, after a heartbeat's hesitation, nodded. They worked together, building 5 snow figures in a rough circle. Maggie insisted on making hers the smallest. Charlotte crafted hers with careful attention to detail. Thomas gave his figure a lopsided smile. Eugenia helped them build one for William. Tall, dignified, standing slightly apart, but facing towards the others. When they finished, all 4 of them stepped back to admire their work. "It's us," Maggie said softly. "All of us." Eugenia glanced up at the window. William was no longer there. Her heart sank. He hadn't even watched them finish. But that night, after the children were asleep, Eugenia happened to look out her window and saw fresh footprints in the snow. Someone had walked out to the Snow family and stood there, perhaps for some time. The footprints were deep, as if the person had remained motionless for many minutes. And beside the figure representing William, someone had placed a hand against its shoulder. Eugenia pressed her fingers to the cold glass, something warm and fragile blooming in her chest. He had seen it. He had gone out to see it. It was something. Small, perhaps, but something. Christmas approached with the inexorable cheer peculiar to the season. Mrs. Davies consulted Eugenia about preparations, and together they organized decorations for the main hall. Greenery, ribbons, a massive tree that required 4 footmen to erect. The children were involved in every detail, excited in the way only children can be at Christmas. They made paper chains, selected ornaments from boxes brought down from the attic, and argued good-naturedly about the placement of each decoration. William did not participate, but Eugenia noticed he stopped to observe occasionally, a shadow in doorways, there and gone before anyone could address him. On Christmas Eve, Dr. Harrison arrived for dinner, the first guest Ashford Hall had hosted since Eugenia's arrival. He was a pleasant man of perhaps 40, with kind eyes and an easy manner that suggested long friendship with William. At dinner he addressed Eugenia directly, ignoring William's clear discomfort. "Lady Ashford, I'm delighted to finally meet you. The children speak of nothing else when I visit." "You're too kind, Dr. Harrison," Eugenia replied, surprised and touched. "Not at all. Charlotte informed me quite seriously that you're the best teacher she's ever had. High praise from that young lady." He smiled warmly. "And Thomas tells me you've been reading them Robinson Crusoe at bedtime. We're quite invested in Crusoe's survival," Eugenia confirmed, relaxing slightly. Dr. Harrison's presence was like a window opening in a stuffy room. "I remember when William and I read that book as boys," Dr. Harrison continued, glancing at his friend. "We built a fort in the woods and pretended we were shipwrecked, nearly gave his mother an apoplexy when we didn't come home for dinner." Something flickered across William's face. Memory, perhaps. Almost a smile. "We were idiots," he said quietly. "We were children," Dr. Harrison corrected gently. "There's a difference." The words hung in the air, weighted with meaning Eugenia couldn't quite grasp. William's expression shuttered again, and he devoted his attention to his meal. After dinner, Dr. Harrison requested a private word with William. They disappeared into the study, leaving Eugenia to oversee the children's final Christmas Eve preparations. When Dr. Harrison emerged an hour later, he sought Eugenia out in the drawing room where she was helping Maggie hang her stocking. "Lady Ashford, might I have a word before I depart?" "Of course." Eugenia settled Maggie with a book and followed the doctor to a quieter corner. Dr. Harrison studied her with those kind, assessing eyes. "You're good for them," he said without preamble. "The children. They're happier than I've seen them in 3 years. Thank you. They're wonderful children." "And William?" Dr. Harrison asked quietly. "How do you find him?" Eugenia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Wounded, lost, very far away." "Yes." Dr. Harrison sighed. "He blames himself for Catherine's death. Irrationally, but completely. He loved her desperately, you understand. When she died, something in him simply stopped. I gathered as much. What you may not know is that he's punishing himself. He believes he doesn't deserve happiness, doesn't deserve his children's love, so he's removed himself from all of it." Dr. Harrison's expression grew troubled. "I've tried to reach him. God knows I've tried. But he won't listen to me." "Why are you telling me this?" Eugenia asked, though part of her already knew. "Because you're his wife. Because you're here, every day, where I cannot be. And because—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "Because I saw the way he looked at you tonight when you laughed at something Maggie said. Just for a moment, he looked alive again." Eugenia's breath caught. "Dr. Harrison, I don't think— I'm not suggesting you can save him, Lady Ashford. No one can save someone determined to drown, but perhaps—" He smiled sadly. "Perhaps you can remind him there's still a shore, if he ever chooses to swim for it." He departed shortly after, leaving Eugenia with thoughts that churned like winter storms. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight turning the snow-covered grounds into a field of diamonds. The children woke early, as children do, and rushed too, their stockings with shrieks of delight. Eugenia had filled them carefully, small toys, sweets, books chosen for each child's particular interests. She'd spent her small quarterly allowance on the gifts, wanting desperately to give them a good Christmas. They opened each item with such joy that Eugenia's eyes stung with tears. "Look, look!" Maggie held up a small wooden horse. "A pony, my very own pony. It's beautiful, darling," Eugenia said, smiling. Charlotte unwrapped a leather-bound journal, running her fingers over the smooth cover with something like reverence. "For writing?" she asked, looking up at Eugenia. "For anything you wish. Thoughts, stories, dreams. A place just for you." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. She threw her arms around Eugenia's waist, holding tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Thomas discovered a small telescope, and his gasp of wonder was worth more than any payment Eugenia had ever received. They were admiring their gifts, talking over each other in excitement, when a soft knock sounded at the nursery door. It opened to reveal William, dressed but dishevelled, as if he'd risen hastily. In his arms, he carried 3 wrapped packages. The room fell silent. The children stared at their father as if he were a ghost materialized before them. William's voice was rough, uncertain. "I brought you something for Christmas." Maggie recovered first, launching herself across the room. "Papa, Papa, look what Eugenia gave us." William knelt to her level, his movements stiff, as if he'd forgotten how to interact with children. But he looked at the wooden horse Maggie thrust toward him, and something in his expression cracked. "It's lovely, Magpie," he said, using a nickname Eugenia hadn't heard before. Charlotte and Thomas approached more slowly, but their eyes were bright with hope that hurt to witness. William handed each child a package. They opened them carefully, reverently, a music box for Charlotte that played a delicate melody, a set of tin soldiers for Thomas, a beautiful doll with golden hair for Maggie. "Mama had one like this," Maggie said softly, holding the doll. "I've seen her in the portrait." "Yes," William said, his voice barely audible. "Your grandmother gave it to her when she was your age." For a moment, they simply stood there, father and children, separated by grief, but connected by love neither side knew how to express. Then Thomas stepped forward and wrapped his small arms around William's waist. William froze. His hands hovered in the air, trembling. Eugenia watched, heart in her throat, as an agony of emotions crossed his face. Love, pain, longing, fear. Slowly, like ice beginning to thaw, William's hands lowered. He touched Thomas's head, fingers gentle in his son's dark hair. Charlotte moved next, pressing against her father's side. William's arm came around her, pulling her close. Maggie climbed into his lap, doll clutched tight. William held his children, his face buried in Charlotte's hair, and his shoulders shook with silent sobs. Eugenia turned away, giving them privacy, her own tears spilling freely. Through the window she saw the snow family they'd built, softened by weeks of sun and new snowfall, but still recognizable. 5 figures. A family. When she finally turned back, William was watching her over Charlotte's head. His eyes were red, his expression raw and vulnerable. For the first time since she'd met him, he truly saw her, not as an employee or an inconvenience, but as the woman who had held his children when he could not, who had kept them safe and loved while he hid from his pain. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. Eugenia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. It wasn't love, it wasn't even friendship, but it was the first crack in the wall he'd built around himself. And sometimes that was where hope began. The weeks following Christmas brought subtle changes to Ashford Hall, like the first signs of spring appearing beneath winter snow. William began joining them for breakfast. Initially he sat in silence, merely present. But gradually he began to answer Charlotte's questions, to ask Thomas about his lessons, to smile when Maggie told rambling, nonsensical stories about her doll's adventures. He still retreated to his study for hours each day, still maintained careful distance. But the distance was smaller now, the walls slightly lower. Eugenia observed these changes with cautious hope, careful not to push, not to expect too much. She had learned that healing was not linear, that progress came in increments so small they were almost invisible until you looked back and realized how far someone had traveled. What she did not expect was for William to seek her company. It happened on a grey January afternoon. She was in the library, her refuge, as it had once been Catherine's, when William appeared in the doorway. "Lady Ashford, may I join you?" Eugenia looked up from her book, surprise evident on her face. "Of course, my lord. It's your library." "It's our library," he corrected quietly, moving to the chair across from hers. "I find I've been unfair to you, in many ways." Eugenia set down her book, pulse quickening. "My lord, you don't need to—" "I do." William leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "You came here under false pretenses. I promised you a position, not a prison, and I've made this house a prison for all of us." "You've been grieving," Eugenia said gently. "I've been hiding," William countered. "Behind grief, yes, but hiding nonetheless." He looked at her directly, and the vulnerability in his eyes stole her breath. "You've done more for my children in 3 months than I've managed in 3 years. You've given them stability, affection, hope, things I should have provided." You're their father. They don't need you to be perfect. They just need you." "I couldn't touch them," William said, his voice breaking. "Did you know that? After Catherine died, I couldn't bear to touch them. Every time I looked at them, I saw her. Every time they laughed, I remembered her laugh. And the guilt—" He pressed a fist against his chest. The guilt was suffocating. "You didn't kill her," Eugenia said firmly. "Childbirth is dangerous. What happened was tragic, but it wasn't your fault. Logically, I know that. Dr. Harrison has said as much 1,000 times." William's laugh was bitter. But logic has little power over grief or guilt. They sat in silence for a moment, fire crackling, afternoon light fading beyond the windows. "What changed?" Eugenia asked softly. "On Christmas morning?" William was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Maggie said something about her doll looking like Catherine, and I realized my children are growing up without their mother, and I've forced them to grow up without their father too, because I was too selfish, too consumed by my own pain to see theirs." He looked at Eugenia again, his expression raw. "And I saw you, turning away to give us privacy, crying for children who aren't even yours by blood, loving them without hesitation, without reservation. And I thought, if this woman, who owes us nothing, can love them so completely, what excuse do I have?" Eugenia's throat tightened. "They're very easy to love. Yes, they are." William's gaze held hers. "You are not what I expected, Eugenia." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it sent warmth through her chest. "What did you expect?" she asked. "Someone adequate, competent, forgettable?" His mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You are none of those things." Before Eugenia could respond, before she could even process what he meant, Maggie burst into the library, breathless with excitement. Papa, Thomas found a bird with a hurt wing. Can we help it, please?" William rose immediately, but he glanced back at Eugenia as Maggie tugged his hand. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a question neither was ready to answer. "We'll discuss this another time," William said quietly. Eugenia nodded, her heart racing. Another time. She watched them leave, Maggie chattering about the bird, William listening with genuine attention. "You are not what I expected." What did that mean? And why did it make her feel as if she were standing at the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful? Eugenia pressed her hand to her racing heart and tried to remember all the reasons she should not hope for more than she'd been promised. But hope, she was discovering, did not require permission. It simply grew, like spring flowers pushing through late snow. Inevitable, unstoppable, dangerous. February brought storms that kept everyone indoors. The children grew restless, and even Eugenia's creative lessons couldn't fully contain their energy. One particularly wild afternoon, when rain lashed the windows and thunder rattled the glass, Thomas accidentally knocked over a vase in the nursery, an expensive-looking piece of porcelain that shattered spectacularly across the floor. The boy went white with terror. "I'm sorry," he gasped, backing away from the destruction. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. Please don't. Thomas, it's all right," Eugenia said quickly, reaching for him. But Thomas was beyond hearing, panic transforming his face. "Papa will be so angry. He'll send me away. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." "No one is sending you anywhere," Eugenia said firmly, kneeling to his level. "It was an accident. Accidents happen." "But it was Mama's," Charlotte said quietly from the corner, her face pale. "Mama loved that vase." The words fell into the room like stones into still water, ripples of tension spreading outward. William appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene immediately. The shattered porcelain, Thomas's terrified face, Charlotte's stricken expression. "I see we've had an accident," he said calmly. Thomas began to cry. "I'm sorry, Papa. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to break Mama's vase." William crossed the room and knelt beside his son, heedless of the porcelain shards threatening his expensive trousers. "Thomas, look at me." Thomas raised his tear-stained face. "It was a vase," William said gently. "Glass and paint, nothing more." "But, Mama, your mother is not a vase. She's not any object in this house." William cupped Thomas's face in both hands. "Your mother is here." He touched Thomas's chest, over his heart. "And here." He touched the boy's head. "In your memories, in your sister's laugh, in Maggie's curiosity. Objects break. Love doesn't." Charlotte made a small sound, pressing her hand to her mouth. William opened his arms, and Thomas threw himself into them, sobbing. Charlotte joined them a moment later, and then Maggie, drawn by the emotion even if she didn't fully understand it. Eugenia stepped back, giving them space, but William looked up at her. "Stay," he said simply. So she stayed, watching this small, broken family knit itself back together, piece by fragile piece. Later, after the children were calm and the vase had been swept up, after Mrs. Davies had brought hot chocolate and the storm had softened to gentle rain, William found Eugenia in the library. "They're asleep," he reported, settling into the chair that had become his when he visited. "All three in Maggie's bed, piled like puppies." Eugenia smiled. "They do that sometimes, when they need comfort." "I know, I've seen." William paused. "I've been watching more than you realize. From doorways, from windows, trying to learn how to be their father again." "You never stopped being their father." "Didn't I?" His voice was soft, sad. "I stopped doing all the things fathers do, playing, laughing, comforting. I was present only as a ghost might be present, visible but untouchable." "You're here now," Eugenia pointed out. "Solid, real, because of you." William leaned forward, his expression intense. "You walked into this house and refused to accept our brokenness. You loved my children without permission, without hesitation. You—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "You made me want to be alive again." Eugenia's breath caught. "William, I know what we agreed." He continued, as if afraid stopping would mean never starting again. "I know I promised you nothing but security and position. A marriage on paper only. But I find that paper is not enough for me anymore." The room seemed to shrink, the air between them charged with possibility. "What are you saying?" Eugenia whispered. "I'm saying that I see you, not as a governess or an employee, as a woman, as my wife." William stood, crossing to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm saying that somewhere in these months, without my permission or planning, I've begun to care for you. Deeply." Eugenia's heart hammered against her ribs. "You're grieving. You're vulnerable. You might be confusing gratitude with—" "Don't," William said firmly. "Don't diminish what I feel. I'm not confused. I'm terrified. Yes, guilty, absolutely. But I know the difference between gratitude and this." "This," Eugenia prompted, her voice barely audible. "This feeling that when you walk into a room, the air becomes easier to breathe. That your smile is something I find myself hoping to earn. That the thought of you leaving—" His hands tightened on hers. "The thought of you leaving is unendurable." Tears spilled down Eugenia's cheeks. "I've been invisible my whole life, William. Please don't say these things unless you mean them. I can't hope for something and lose it. Not again." "You've never been invisible to me," William said, and the truth of it blazed in his eyes. "Never. From the moment you held Thomas that first night, from the first time you defended my children, from every small kindness you've shown to a family that had forgotten kindness existed, I've seen you, Eugenia. God help me, you're all I see now. I love them, Eugenia whispered. Charlotte, Thomas, Maggie. I love them so much. I know, and they love you. They've said as much to me, though Maggie's version involved significantly more detail about how you braid hair and tell stories and make the best hot chocolate. Despite everything? Eugenia laughed, the sound wet with tears. William reached up, brushing tears from her cheeks with infinite gentleness. May I court you, Eugenia? May I try to earn what I should have offered from the beginning? A real marriage, a partnership. Perhaps if you'll allow it, love. We're already married, Eugenia pointed out, her heart soaring even as her practical mind protested. Then may I court my own wife? Prove to her that she's not just valued but cherished? That she's not just seen but admired? Eugenia looked into his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had been so cold and empty months ago, now warm with hope and vulnerability, and something that looked remarkably like wonder. Yes, she whispered. Yes, you may court me. William's smile transformed his face, making him look years younger, like a man waking from a long sleep. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Thank you, he said simply. They sat there in the firelight, hands joined, the storm outside softening to nothing, and Eugenia thought that sometimes the most extraordinary things began with the smallest hopes. A wife on paper, they'd said. But perhaps paper could be rewritten. Perhaps anything could if you were brave enough to pick up the pen. The next weeks were strange and wonderful, a courtship conducted within the bounds of marriage, with 3 delighted children as constant chaperones. William began appearing at breakfast regularly, engaging in actual conversation. He asked Eugenia about her childhood, her favorite books, her thoughts on subjects ranging from philosophy to the best way to manage rose gardens. He walked with her in the gardens when weather permitted, their conversations growing deeper, more personal. He told her about his own childhood, about his friendship with Dr. Harrison, about his early marriage to Catherine, speaking of his first wife not as a ghost to haunt them, but as a person he'd loved and lost. She would have liked you, he said one afternoon as they watched the children play. Catherine, she would have appreciated your strength, your kindness to the children. I wish I could have known her, Eugenia said honestly. She was wonderful. But Eugenia... William took her hand, threading their fingers together. Loving her doesn't mean I cannot love you. My heart isn't a finite resource. It can hold both her memory and my future. Eugenia squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. The children noticed the changes, of course. Children always did. Papa smiles now, Maggie announced one evening at dinner, her tone suggesting this was a scientific observation. All the time, at everything. Do I? William asked, amused. Yes, especially when you look at Eugenia. Maggie turned to Eugenia with serious eyes. Are you going to stay forever? Eugenia glanced at William, uncertain how to answer. She is, William said firmly, his eyes on Eugenia. If she wishes. Forever. Good, Maggie said, satisfied, and returned to her pudding. Charlotte, more perceptive, studied them both with thoughtful eyes. You love her, she said to her father. Not a question. A statement. William didn't look away from Eugenia. I do. Thomas beamed. Does that mean we're a real family now? We've always been a real family, Eugenia said gently. But yes, darling, we are. That night, William walked Eugenia to her chambers. A new routine he'd established, these few private moments at day's end. At her door, he took both her hands, his expression tender. "I want to ask you something," he said quietly. "Yes? These rooms, yours?" He gestured to the door. "They're lovely, but they're not where I want you to be." Eugenia's breath caught. "William, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he said quickly. "But I want you to know. My chambers, my bed, my life. They're yours, Eugenia. Whenever you want them. If you want them." Eugenia's heart raced. They'd kissed, certainly. Gentle, careful kisses that promised more. But this was different. This was William offering not just his heart, but his whole self. "I want them," she whispered. "I want you. But... His thumb traced circles on her wrist, patient. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "What if this is temporary? What if you wake up one day and realize I'm not enough?" William pulled her closer, his hands framing her face with such tenderness it made her ache. "Eugenia, you walked into a broken house and made it home. You loved abandoned children and taught them joy again. You looked at a man determined to drown in grief and threw him a lifeline, even when he tried to refuse it." He pressed his forehead to hers, voice rough with emotion. "You are everything, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you, if you'll let me." "Promise me something," Eugenia said, her hands fisting in his shirt. "Anything. Promise me that if you ever doubt, if you ever feel like you're betraying Catherine's memory, you'll talk to me. Promise me we'll face it together." "I promise," William said immediately. "No more hiding. No more walls." "Then yes," Eugenia breathed. "Yes to everything. Yes to sharing your chambers, your life, your future. Yes to loving you completely and without reservation." William's kiss was not gentle this time. It was claiming, desperate, full of months of denied emotion finally released. Eugenia melted into him, her arms winding around his neck, and let herself fall into the glorious certainty of being loved. When they finally parted, both breathless, William rested his forehead against hers once more. "Come with me," he whispered. And Eugenia, who had spent 28 years invisible and the last 4 months visible but untouchable, took his hand and let him lead her to the east wing, to his chambers, to the beginning of their real life together. Behind them, unnoticed, 3 children peered around a corner, grinning. "I told you Eugenia would fix everything," Charlotte whispered to her siblings. "She didn't fix it," Thomas corrected softly, wise beyond his years. "She just loved us until we remembered how to fix ourselves." Maggie yawned, leaning against Charlotte. "I'm glad she's staying forever." "So am I," Charlotte said, watching their father and stepmother disappear down the corridor, hands joined, heads bent close together. "So am I." Spring arrived at Ashford Hall like a promise kept, transforming the grey winter landscape into something alive with colour and possibility. The gardens bloomed with daffodils and early roses, birds returned to nest in the ancient trees, and the house itself seemed to exhale, as if it, too, had been holding its breath through the long, cold months. Eugenia woke in William's arms, sunlight streaming through the windows of their shared chambers. This had become her favourite moment of each day, the quiet minutes before the household stirred, when she could simply exist in the warmth of his embrace and marvel at the impossible truth of her life. She was loved, completely, wholly, without reservation. William's hand traced lazy patterns on her shoulder, his breath warm against her hair. "You're thinking too much," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "I can practically hear your thoughts." "I'm thinking that I'm happy," Eugenia said, tilting her head to look at him. "Dangerously happy." "Dangerously." William's eyebrow arched, amused. "As if something must come to ruin it. As if I'll wake up and discover this was all a dream. William shifted, pulling her closer until she was tucked against his chest, his arms secure around her. Not a dream. I promise. You. Though I understand the fear. His voice softened. I wake sometimes convinced I've imagined you, that I'll find myself alone again, with nothing but guilt and shadows for company. But we're both here, Eugenia said, pressing her hand over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palm. Real and awake and together. Together, William agreed, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips. I have a confession to make. Oh? Eugenia's pulse quickened, despite his playful tone. The children have been lobbying for a family trip to Bath. Charlotte wants to visit the bookshops. Thomas has developed a sudden fascination with Roman history, and Maggie simply wants to ride in a carriage for very long distances while singing increasingly creative songs. Eugenia laughed. That does sound like Maggie. I thought... William paused, suddenly uncertain in a way that made him endearing. I thought perhaps we could go, all of us, as a family, if you'd like. I would love that, Eugenia said, warmth blooming in her chest. 6 months ago, William had barely been able to share a meal with his children. Now he was planning trips, making memories, choosing life over grief. There's another reason, William admitted, his fingers threading through her hair. Bath is where Catherine and I honeymooned. I've avoided it since her death, but I think... He drew a careful breath. I think it's time I stopped running from memories. Time I made new ones with you. Eugenia rose on her elbow, studying his face. The shadows were still there. Grief never truly disappeared, but they no longer consumed him. Are you certain? I am. William cupped her cheek, his gaze steady and sure. I loved Catherine. I always will. But my life isn't over, Eugenia. You've taught me that. You and the children. And I want to live it, fully, completely with all of you. She kissed him then, soft and lingering, pouring everything she felt into the press of her lips against his. When she pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. Bath it is, she whispered. A knock sounded at the door, tentative, followed by giggling. Papa? Eugenia? Maggie's voice carried through the wood. Are you awake? Can we come in? William groaned softly. I should have locked that door. You love that they feel comfortable coming to us, Eugenia countered, climbing out of bed and reaching for her dressing gown. I do, William admitted, following suit, though my timing might benefit from improvement. He opened the door to find all 3 children standing in the corridor, already dressed for the day despite the early hour. We couldn't sleep, Charlotte announced, though her expression suggested this was a manufactured excuse. We wanted to ask about the trip to Bath. Eavesdropping? William asked, though his tone was indulgent. Strategically listening, Thomas corrected with perfect seriousness. William laughed, a sound that still made Eugenia's heart soar, for its rarity had once been absolute. Come in, then. We might as well discuss it properly. The 5 of them settled on the large bed, children bouncing with excitement while Eugenia and William attempted to maintain some semblance of parental authority. When can we leave? Maggie demanded immediately. In 2 weeks, if we're properly prepared, William said. We'll need to arrange accommodations, pack appropriate clothing. Will there be bookshops? Charlotte interrupted, leaning forward eagerly. Real ones, with hundreds of books? Thousands, Eugenia confirmed. Bath has some of the finest shops in England. And the Roman baths? Thomas asked. Can we see where the Romans actually bathed? We can, William promised, though I draw the line at you attempting to bathe there yourselves. What about dresses? Maggie tugged at Eugenia's sleeve. Can we get new dresses, matching ones? We'll see, Eugenia said diplomatically. The conversation devolved into excited planning, with each child presenting increasingly elaborate ideas for their trip. William caught Eugenia's eye across the chaos, his expression tender and slightly overwhelmed. "This is family," his eyes seemed to say. "Messy and loud and absolutely perfect." Eugenia smiled back, her heart so full it ached. Yes, this was family. The journey to Bath took 2 days, with an overnight stop at a coaching inn. The children were simultaneously restless and enthralled, pressing their faces to the carriage windows to watch the countryside roll past. William bore their excitement with patient good humour, answering endless questions and inventing games to pass the time. Watching him with the children, fully present, fully engaged, Eugenia felt gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. They arrived in Bath on a sunny afternoon, the city spread before them like something from a watercolour. Golden stone buildings, elegant crescents, the river winding through the valley. "It's beautiful," Charlotte breathed, her nose pressed to the glass. "Wait until you see the shops," Eugenia promised. They stayed at a hotel on Milsom Street, taking a suite of rooms that gave them both privacy and proximity. That first evening, after the children were settled, William took Eugenia walking through the city. "I need to show you something," he said quietly, his hand firm in hers. He led her through lamplit streets to a small church on a quiet square. "St. Michael's," the sign read. "This is where Catherine and I married," William said, his voice steady but soft. "I haven't been back since." Eugenia squeezed his hand, offering silent support. They stood together in the gathering dusk, looking at the church where William had promised forever to another woman. Eugenia waited, patient, knowing he needed to do this in his own time. "I was so young," William said finally. 22 years old, convinced I understood everything about love and life. Catherine was 19, beautiful and full of light. We thought we had all the time in the world. His throat worked. "We didn't. I'm sorry," Eugenia said softly. "I know. I am too." William turned to her, taking both her hands. "But I'm also grateful for the years we had, for the children she gave me, for the love we shared. It was real and good, and it shaped who I am." "Of course it did. But Eugenia," his grip tightened, "you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope, joy, the ability to imagine a future instead of simply enduring the present. You've healed me in ways I didn't know I needed healing." "You healed yourself," Eugenia protested. You loved me when I was unlovable. You saw me when I'd made myself invisible. You refused to accept my walls and my grief as permanent conditions." William's voice broke. "You saved me, Eugenia. You and the children. You saved us all." Tears spilled down Eugenia's cheeks. "I love you," she whispered. "So much it terrifies me." "Don't be terrified." William brushed away her tears with gentle fingers. "Love isn't something to fear anymore, not for either of us." He kissed her there, in front of the church where he'd married his first wife, and Eugenia understood the significance of the moment. This was William choosing to move forward while honoring his past. This was him saying goodbye to guilt and hello to possibility. When they parted, both breathless, William rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you for being patient with me," he murmured, "for not giving up when I was determined to remain lost." "I would wait lifetimes for you," Eugenia said simply. "You're worth it." They walked back to the hotel, hand in hand, the spring evening soft around them, and Eugenia thought that sometimes the greatest love stories were the ones that began with the smallest hopes and grew into something vast enough to hold both joy and sorrow, past and future, loss and love. The week in Bath was magical in the way only family holidays can be. equal parts wonder and chaos, with moments of pure joy scattered among minor disasters. Charlotte discovered a bookshop on Milsom Street and had to be physically removed when closing time arrived. Thomas spent hours at the Roman baths, sketching the ancient architecture with surprising skill. Maggie made friends with every child she encountered and somehow convinced a street performer to teach her juggling. They took tea at the Pump Room, walked through the Royal Crescent, and explored Sydney Gardens until the children were sun-tired and happy. William was attentive and present, pointing out architectural details, telling stories, carrying Maggie when her small legs grew weary. On their fourth evening, while the children were occupied with a puppet show in the hotel's drawing room, William drew Eugenia aside. "Walk with me?" They strolled through the city as dusk fell, gaslights flickering to life along the streets. William was quiet, his expression thoughtful. "What's on your mind?" Eugenia asked finally. William stopped walking, turning to face her. They stood on Pulteney Bridge, the river flowing beneath them, the last light of day painting everything gold. "When I married you," he began carefully, "I made vows in a church with no feeling behind them. Legal words, binding but empty." Eugenia's heart clenched. "William, let me finish." He took her hands, his grip firm. "Those vows were inadequate. Worse, they were lies. I promised to honor you when I intended to ignore you, to cherish you when I planned to keep you at a distance, to love you when I believed myself incapable of love. You were grieving. You didn't know. I want to renew them." William interrupted, his eyes blazing with intensity. "Our vows. I want to stand before God and you and actually mean what I say. I want to promise you everything I failed to promise before: partnership, devotion, love. A real marriage, Eugenia, the one you deserved from the beginning." Eugenia's breath caught. "You want to marry me again?" "I want to marry you properly, with joy instead of obligation, with hope instead of resignation." William's voice roughened with emotion. "I want our children there, and Dr. Harrison, and anyone else who matters to you. I want to vow my life to yours with full knowledge of what that means, and with gratitude that you're allowing me to." Tears streamed down Eugenia's face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, William. 1,000 times, yes." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Against her hair, she felt him trembling. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you so much it remakes me daily. I love your strength, your compassion, your fierce protection of our children. I love the way you've transformed our house into a home. I love—" His voice broke. "I love everything about you, Eugenia, and I want the world to know it." They stood there on the bridge as night fell completely, wrapped in each other, and Eugenia thought her heart might burst from the impossible fullness of her joy. She had been invisible for 28 years, a wife on paper for 6 months, and now she was loved, chosen, cherished. Sometimes fairy tales did come true, just not the way anyone expected. They returned to Ashford Hall in late April, the estate in full spring bloom. The servants greeted them warmly. Even Mrs. Davies managed a genuine smile, having long since abandoned her loyalty to Catherine's memory in favor of appreciation for Eugenia's present kindness. The children burst into the house with stories for everyone, their voices echoing through corridors that had been silent for too long. "We're having another wedding," Maggie announced to Mrs. Davies without preamble. "Papa and Eugenia are getting married again, properly this time." Mrs. Davies's eyes widened. She looked to William for confirmation. "It's true," William said, his arm around Eugenia's waist, a casual intimacy that would have been unthinkable months ago. "We're renewing our vows in June. We'd be honored if the entire household would attend." A murmur of surprise and pleasure rippled through the assembled servants. Mrs. Davies pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes bright. "Oh, my lord, my lady, We would be delighted. Excellent, William said, smiling. Mrs. Davies, you'll assist Lady Ashford with preparations. I'm told weddings require significant planning. Of course, my lord. The housekeeper curtsied, but her gaze on Eugenia was warm. We'll make it perfect. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Invitations were sent, a new dress commissioned, flowers selected, menu planned. The children participated in every decision, treating the event with the gravity of a royal coronation. Dr. Harrison arrived a week before the ceremony, delighted by the transformation he found. William, he said, gripping his friend's shoulder with obvious emotion. You're yourself again, better than yourself. I had help, William said, his eyes finding Eugenia across the room, where she was consulting with Mrs. Davies about table arrangements. She's remarkable, Dr. Harrison observed. You're a fortunate man. I know. William's expression softened. I spent 3 years convinced I didn't deserve happiness. Eugenia taught me that grief and joy can coexist, that loving again doesn't diminish what I felt before. That... He paused, struggling with words. That life is for the living. Catherine would be glad. Dr. Harrison said quietly. She would want this for you, for the children. William nodded, throat tight. I know. I'm finally starting to believe it. The evening before the ceremony, William found Eugenia in their chambers, staring out the window at the gardens below. Nervous? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Terrified, she admitted, leaning back against him. What if I trip walking down the aisle? What if I cry through the entire ceremony? What if nothing goes according to plan, and it's still perfect because we're together? William pressed a kiss to her temple. That's my prediction. Eugenia turned in his arms, looking up at him. A year ago, I was invisible, a governess with no prospects, no family, no hope. And now you're the Marchioness of Ashford, beloved by 3 children and one formerly impossible husband. William's smile was tender. And you're visible, Eugenia. So visible that looking at you sometimes blinds me. She reached up, cupping his face. I love you. I need you to know that. Not because you're a Marquess or because you gave me security, but because you're you, wounded and whole, complex and kind, perfectly imperfect. I love you too, William said, his voice rough. My wife, my partner, my everything. They stood there in the fading light, holding each other, and the house around them hummed with life and preparation and joy. Tomorrow they would make vows they actually meant. Tomorrow they would celebrate before witnesses who understood the journey they'd traveled. But tonight, they simply held each other and marveled at the impossible gift of second chances. June 10th dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect summer day that seemed designed for weddings. Eugenia woke early, alone in their chambers. William had insisted on staying in a guest room the night before, claiming he wanted to see her walking down the aisle with fresh eyes. Romantic nonsense, Eugenia had teased. Indulge me. William had replied, kissing her soundly before departing. Now, surrounded by her new lady's maid and Mrs. Davies, Eugenia allowed herself to be dressed in a gown of ivory silk with delicate blue embroidery. Something old. The lace was from her mother's wedding dress. Something new, the gown itself. Something borrowed. Pearl earrings from Mrs. Davies. Something blue. Ribbon woven through her hair. Charlotte, Thomas, and Maggie burst into the room, already dressed in their finest clothes. You look like a princess, Maggie breathed, eyes wide. You look like Mama, Charlotte said softly, then quickly added, but yourself, your own kind of beautiful. Eugenia's eyes filled with tears. She knelt carefully, mindful of her dress, and opened her arms. The children rushed into them. "Thank you," she whispered, "for accepting me, for loving me, for letting me love you." "You're our mother now," Thomas said simply. "Our real mother, the one who chose us." "I did choose you," Eugenia said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you. Best decision I ever made." A knock sounded. Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway, looking distinguished in his formal attire. "May I?" he asked. "I've been given the honor of escorting the bride, if she'll have me." Eugenia rose, accepting his offered arm gratefully. She had no father, no family to walk her down the aisle. That Dr. Harrison had offered meant more than she could express. They processed through the house to the chapel, a small stone building on the estate grounds that had served Ashford family weddings for generations. It was filled with servants, tenants, and local families, all dressed in their Sunday best. But Eugenia only saw William. He stood at the altar in a dark blue coat, his expression unguarded and blazing with love. As she walked toward him, his eyes never left her face, and she saw him mouth two words, "Thank you." She smiled, tears spilling freely now, and thought, "No, thank you." Dr. Harrison placed her hand in William's, then stepped back. The vicar began speaking, but Eugenia barely heard him. She was lost in William's eyes, in the warmth of his hand holding hers, in the sheer impossible wonder of this moment. When it came time for vows, William spoke first, his voice clear and steady. "Eugenia, I stand before you today not as the man who married you last autumn, cold, closed, convinced he had nothing to offer. I stand before you as the man you've helped me become, open, grateful, and overflowing with love I thought I'd lost forever." His grip tightened on her hands. "I vow to see you, always, to value your thoughts, honor your feelings, and never take for granted the gift of your presence in my life. I vow to be your partner in all things, in joy and sorrow, in triumph and challenge. I vow to love you not just today, but every day, with increasing depth and devotion." He paused, voice roughening. "I vow to be the husband you deserve, the one I failed to be at first, but will strive to be for the rest of our lives. You are my heart, Eugenia, my home, my everything, and I thank God daily that you chose to love me anyway." Eugenia couldn't speak past the tears, but she had to try. She drew a shaking breath. "William, I came to you invisible, a governess, a nobody, a woman the world had forgotten. You looked past that invisibility, first in your children, then in me. You saw me when no one else did." She squeezed his hands. "I vow to stand beside you, not behind you or ahead of you, but beside you as your equal partner. I vow to love your children as my own, to nurture this family we've built from broken pieces into something whole and beautiful. I vow to challenge you when you retreat, to hold you when you grieve, to celebrate with you when you triumph." Her voice broke. "I vow to love you, not the man you were, not the man you think you should be, but exactly the man you are. Wounded and healing, complex and kind, perfectly imperfect. You are my miracle, William, and I will spend my life being worthy of the gift you've given me, yourself, wholly and without reservation." The vicar pronounced them married, again, truly, forever this time. William cupped Eugenia's face and kissed her with such tenderness it drew sighs from the assembled witnesses. When they parted, both were crying. "I love you," William whispered. "I love you too," Eugenia replied. Behind them, Maggie's voice rang out, "Can we celebrate now? I'm hungry." Laughter rippled through the chapel, breaking the emotional tension. William and Eugenia turned to face their family and friends, hands joined, smiling through their tears. The celebration that followed was joyous and chaotic and absolutely perfect, exactly as William had predicted. There was food and dancing and toasts that ranged from touching to hilarious. The children stayed up far past their bedtime, dancing with every adult who would indulge them. As dusk fell, William pulled Eugenia away from the crowds, leading her to the gardens. "I wanted a moment alone with my wife," he said, his arms encircling her waist. "Your wife," Eugenia repeated, savoring the words. "Not on paper anymore. Never on paper again." William's kiss was slow and deep, full of promise. Only in truth. Only in love. They stood there as stars emerged overhead, wrapped in each other, and Eugenia thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a cold office in London to this garden in Derbyshire, from strangers to spouses to partners to lovers, from invisible to cherished, from paper to permanence. 5 years later, the nursery at Ashford Hall was pandemonium, the happy kind that suggested both chaos and deep contentment. Charlotte, now 14, sat in the window seat reading aloud to her younger siblings while trying to ignore their squirming. Thomas, 11, was supposed to be listening, but kept sneaking glances at the telescope Eugenia and William had given him for his birthday. Maggie, 9, lounged across Charlotte's lap with the unconscious affection of a well-loved cat. And in Eugenia's arms, gurgling happily, was 2-year-old Catherine, named for the mother the older children remembered with love, but without pain, and the woman Eugenia honored without resentment. "Mama Kate is drooling on you," Maggie observed without looking up from Charlotte's book. "Babies drool, Magpie," Eugenia said mildly, adjusting the little girl against her shoulder. "You drooled constantly at this age." "I did not." "You did," Charlotte confirmed with the authority of an older sister. "I remember." The door opened, and William entered, still dressed from estate business, but loosening his cravat with visible relief. "Papa!" Maggie launched herself across the room, and William caught her with practiced ease. "Hello, troublemaker. Have you been good today?" "Define good," Maggie said with suspicious innocence. William's eyes met Eugenia's over Maggie's head, amusement dancing in their depths. "That well, was it?" "She convinced Thomas to help her build a fort using your study chairs," Eugenia reported, "and may have accidentally knocked over an inkwell in the process." "Accidentally," Maggie insisted. William set her down, then crossed to Eugenia, pressing a kiss to her forehead before dropping another on baby Catherine's head. "And how is our littlest troublemaker?" "Perfect," Eugenia said, gazing down at the dark-haired baby who had her father's eyes and her mother's dimples. "Absolutely perfect." "Like her mother," William murmured, his hand gentle on Eugenia's shoulder. Charlotte made a gagging sound. "You two are disgustingly romantic. When you're older, you'll understand," William said, unperturbed. "When I'm older, I'm never falling in love," Charlotte declared. "It makes people absurd." "Give her 5 years," Eugenia whispered to William. 3, William countered. "She's her mother's daughter, smart, stubborn, and far too perceptive for her own good." They gathered for dinner as they did every evening, all 6 of them around the table, talking over each other, laughing, occasionally arguing about nothing that mattered. After dinner, they relocated to the library, where William read aloud while Eugenia nursed Catherine and the older children sprawled across various pieces of furniture. It was ordinary. Beautifully, perfectly ordinary. Later, after the children were finally asleep, William and Eugenia retreated to their chambers. "Happy?" William asked, pulling Eugenia into his arms as they stood by the window, overlooking the gardens. "Impossibly so," Eugenia admitted. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." "Believe it." William's hand splayed across her stomach, still soft from carrying Catherine, and something Eugenia had learned not to be ashamed of. This is real. We're real. All of it. Eugenia turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had been a ghost and become fully, vibrantly alive. His face bore new lines, from laughter now, not just grief. His eyes held warmth where once there had been only ice. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The life before? Before me, before all this chaos?" William was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I miss Catherine," he said finally. "I always will in some corner of my heart. But do I miss the man I was? Empty, isolated, slowly dying while pretending to live?" He cupped Eugenia's face with infinite tenderness. "Never. Not for a single moment." "I love you," Eugenia whispered, the words as true now as they'd been on their wedding day, both of them. "I love you too," William replied. "My wife. Not on paper, not by arrangement, but by choice, by devotion, by love that grows deeper every day." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And Eugenia thought about the girl she'd been, sitting in that cold office in London, agreeing to marry a stranger because she had no other options. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this family. But then, the best things in life were often the ones you couldn't imagine until they found you. Eugenia had been a wife on paper. Now she was simply a wife, a mother, a partner, a woman loved beyond measure and loving in return. And sometimes, just sometimes, the fairy tale didn't begin with "once upon a time." Sometimes it began with "I accept," and ended with "happily ever after." Ashford Hall, 1873. The portrait hung in the library, commissioned for their 10th anniversary. It showed the entire family, William and Eugenia seated, surrounded by Charlotte, now 19 and engaged to a respectable baron's son, Thomas, 16 and about to start at Cambridge, Maggie, 14 and still causing delightful trouble, Catherine, 7 and as sunny as her namesake, and the twins, Edmund and Elizabeth, 5 years old and clutching their parents' hands. Visitors to Ashford Hall always stopped to admire it. "The Marquess looks so happy," they would say. "And the children, so many. What a blessed family." They never knew the whole story. How the woman in the portrait had arrived as nothing more than a governess with a legal title. How the man had been barely alive, drowning in grief. How 3 motherless children had begged her to heal their father. They only saw the ending, the happiness, the love, the family. And perhaps that was as it should be. Some stories were meant to be private, treasured, held close. But if those visitors looked very carefully at the portrait, they might notice something. The way William's hand rested on Eugenia's shoulder, protective and proud. The way Eugenia's smile held both joy and wonder, as if she still couldn't quite believe her good fortune. And in the corner, almost hidden, a small inscription. "From paper to permanence, with love always." Those who knew understood. Those who didn't would never need to. Because in the end, the only thing that mattered was this. They had found each other. They had chosen each other. They had loved each other. And they had lived truly, fully, beautifully, ever after.